So yeah, I'm Matt Davidson. I'm a principal software engineer at Williams, F1 team. We're going to talk today a bit about proxy source generators, which is a source generator we've used fairly recently, but to solve quite a common problem, which is wrapping a third-party library that doesn't have any interfaces, doesn't have any way of mocking or testing without actually running up this third-party application, which has license costs, it has specific hardware dependencies and so forth. And so we do quite a lot of adapting of this piece of software. And it has a .NET library, but it's very concrete, and we've got a lot of new functionality that we're doing, and it was just really getting very difficult to test. So one of our CFD, CAD engineers came up with the idea, we want to be able to test this, and they started sort of manually writing proxies. Just to step back a bit, not just assume everybody knows what a proxy pattern is, but it's a very well-known pattern from the Gang of Four book, which was published in the 90s, I think, to tackle common repeatable patterns in object-oriented programming. Effectively, the proxy pattern is a technique that you can use, a pattern that you can use to provide a surrogate or placeholder for another object to control access to it. That was the original definition, and then refactoring Guru, I found this slightly more useful. Lets you provide a substitute or placeholder for another object, and this is their image here, but as you can see, this is your third-party type, and this is your fence that you've protected everything behind the fence that's got to go through this proxy. That looks a lot like the actual thing in person. What do we do? I tried to stop them writing these by hand straight away, because the size of the library is huge, and went and did some research, and there's this very new library called Proxy Interface Source Generator, which was created by a GitHub user, anonymous to me so far, but StefH is a legend, and he has generated a source generator which takes small definitions that you supply using attributes, and you say, I want you to create me a proxy interface for this concrete type. You define it, it generates you an interface that looks just like all of the public surface of that type, and it'll also generate you a concrete proxy implementation which inherits from that interface that you can new up with the real type. So in your production code, you can use that, and in your test code, you can create mocks of them, and then you can make sure that all your production code only really ever uses the interfaces. So if you're doing extensions or new functionality, if you're working with those, it's very much easier to test. We're taking it another level, and we've sort of made the proxies internal that it generates and created a factory in there that will create concrete proxies, but with the only public interface which has been generated by these source codes. So that is enough slides. Let's have a very quick look through this. So I've been doing a bit of work on software engineering career ladders. So the model I've come up with is loosely based around that. And I want you to imagine that this subfolder is effectively a third-party library. It's pretty concrete. It has some data types. There's some code that a dev team member might write, a dev team member. We have an engineering manager. He's got some reports. Note that these are all concrete types that are provided by the third-party library. And it's a bit of a tenuous example, but hopefully it demonstrates enough of what I want to show you with the proxy library that we can go away with. Pardon?
Sorry.
Yeah. So this is a lead software engineer. He can review some code. He can decide if it's great. Senior software can review some great code. He only knows about smelly code, but he's a great coder. So anyway, I mean, the model is pretty silly, but the point is they have an inheritance pattern. They expose some concrete data types. And they're a bit hard to pass around. There's no interfaces here. Not that you might have them, but for the sake of argument, let's try and add one. So first thing I want to do is I want to add a proxy for the code data type. If I do this, what I will get is, as this just sort of runs in the background, go on, it's going to work. Do it, build it. There we go, it pops out here. And we've now got a generated interface which has the syntax in the language and also exposes the inner instance as well. That's now an interface I can pass around, and then get also a concrete implementation of that interface, which is has a constructor which takes a real instance, but then it satisfies that interface by forwarding all of the property accesses and methods to the implementation, the real implementation. So that's stuff you get out of the box simply for writing that amount of code. So we're saying this is a partial interface because the implementation gets provided by the source generator. I want it to generate a proxy, which is in this library, an attribute for this data type. So that's great, but what can I do with it? Well, if I wanted to, I could take some code, which has a language being C#, some syntax, which could be whatever. And now I've got, well, it's not working at O, okay. Get rid of that property syntax that Adam showed us earlier. And do it like this, so. And then if I wanted to, I could make a proxy of it. And I could pass in that code. And then I've got a proxy with the same properties on, so if I wanted to, I could dump that to the console, not like that. Let's just do that. And then if I run that, you're going to get my demo code that I didn't go through. But at the bottom, I'm getting C#. So that's been written, forwarded through the proxy, and I've literally written that in order to get that. So that's not that interesting, but let's have a look at what else we can do. So dev team members are root. It doesn't really have any interesting functionality on, but the software engineers and so forth do. So let's add in proxies for the rest of the engineering team. So if we do that in a moment, they normally just pop out over here, but building it sometimes triggers it. So let's do that. There we go. No, it's come. So now I've got proxies and interfaces for all of these things. And if I go to the because I've specified an inheritance hierarchy through interfaces here, I can then treat a software engineer as an iDiv team member and so on all the way down. And the proxies and the interfaces will respect that as well. So engineering manager, pretty straightforward. Lead software engineer, because it's partial, it carries this definition with it, so you get this inheritance directly from here. The generated stuff doesn't have that, but it extends it. But as you can see, we've now got all of the functionality that we had in the lead software engineer. But what you'll also notice is that it also exposes any public method arguments or return arguments as the interfaces, providing that you've specified that you want an interface for that thing. So it just massively reducing the amount of effort it takes to wrap a third party where all of these things are concrete expectations that you might want to lock away or might not be able to change or abstract for your tests in just as easy as that. There is the developers pretty good at responding to GitHub requests. So we wanted to be able to set a proxy class accessibility so that the proxies that it generates didn't become public to the library. So he popped that in for us, and we had a go at adding it as well and gave him it as an example, and he picked it up and built it. So that means that the way that we've set it up is we've got a library that wraps this third-party library that only exposes interfaces, but is able to generate all these things. So I realise I'm going on and time's short, but I want to show you one more thing. which is an example of a service that uses these concrete types, and that is a bit awkward to test. So let's take a user service. A user service might need a message service, and this message service, for the sake of argument, is a native, wraps a native DLL, Windows DLL, to present a message box to the screen. So that's great. If I run this user service and I create a dev team member, then I will show you what happens. So I say var message service equals new message service, user service equals new user service, pass in that message service, and then I can say user service dot display user message. I can create a user, I can pass lead, let's say, and I can say hi .NET Oxford. And if I run this, it's going to do the console stuff, and look, I get a message box. Well, that's great. So that's kind of what I want in my production code, because I'm wrapping this third-party library. What if I want to test it? Well, let's start with a simple test which does the same thing. If I run this test, oh look, I got a message box and my test hasn't finished. So that's pretty pointless on a build server. So how do I work around that? Well, now I'll add a new proxy. I'll add a proxy for iMessage service. Allow that to sort of kick in. You can check these generated things just by expanding these analyzers tabs. So if we've got a message service proxy, that's great. So now I can say I've got my inner message service, and if I wanted to, I could create the proxy for it. But I don't want to do that. I want my user service to be updated. So I've got control of this type, but previously I didn't have an interface for iMessage service. Now I have. So I can pop that in there. Nothing else changes in here. If I go to my program that I demo, obviously I've now got to wrap that message service in a proxy. Message service proxy, message service, and if I pass that into my user service now, and I run it, I'm going to still get my message box, happy days. But in my test, which I've lost, I can now say I want a new mock of iMessage service. And then I can pass in my mock object. Then I can display my message, and I can say, oh, did it display on the message service, which I couldn't do before, but I can do verify. I can go, did it run, display message box. We don't really care what it's actually printing for the sake of this. I just want to demonstrate that you can now run that test and it completes. That's it in short. So hopefully it's useful. I've shared the demo code, I've posted it, and if we go back to my little slides for the, there's some links, so I'll share these, but the GitHub libraries there. I've pushed this code to a Git repo, and there's a link to the proxy pattern if you want to know more. That's it.